Is there a good chance? I mean, people are already talking about booster shots and things.
Yeah.
Is there a good chance that this is going to be something, this particular virus and its variants, this will be something where people will be asked to get vaccines every year, sort of like a flu shot?
No, I don't think so because of the slower mutation rate. We may need a booster in the next year simply because there's so many global cases that we are evolving. These kind of unusual events happen where there's a higher number of mutations, and we're just getting more and more variation across the world. Mm-hmm. So I expect maybe in the next couple of years a booster will be necessary, but then not so often as the flu after that.
I see. Is there any risk? So I don't know what the precise numbers are. I think we have a majority of the adult population, at least in the US, vaccinated or in somewhere in the 1 to 2 dose range for vaccination. But there's a sizable chunk that have not. And, you know, for better or worse, it looks like a lot of people will not elect to get a vaccine for whatever reason. Is there any danger in having that sort of like sizable chunk of the population that never gets the vaccine, and that sort of creates a window for sort of a perpetual evolution of new variants?
Yes, absolutely. So, and having that population constantly in contact with vaccinated individuals means that there's a lot of opportunities for transmission to happen and opportunities for mutations to arise that can then get into vaccinated individuals. And so, if we could aim, we should be aiming for 100% vaccination. The number one reason is if you have 20% of your population unvaccinated, you have 20% of the population that can land in the hospital and die from COVID-19. So get vaccinated to protect your own health. But also get vaccinated because you don't want to be the one that transmits it to your neighbor or your friend or your parents, and then lands them in hospital. So get vaccinated because you don't want to be the cause of somebody else's COVID-19 severe reaction. And then finally, and this is low down on that list, but it's still in there, get vaccinated so that you make it a little bit harder for this virus to persist and spread within the human population. You thwart its evolution.
Mm-hmm. So which vaccine did you get? Did you get one of the mRNA vaccines or one of the other?
Moderna.
And can you explain for people what those mRNA vaccines are as compared to a traditional vaccine?
So Moderna and Pfizer are giving the little instruction manual, the mRNA, but just for one protein, the spike protein. And the reason why the companies developed it for that is that's also on the outside. That's what our immune systems see. And so it's one of the safest vaccines ever produced in that it's not an inactivated virus. It doesn't have all of the genetic coding it would need to actually make a virus. It's just this teeny piece of the genome that just makes one protein. Honestly, I think that it works better than anybody ever expected it to, that we just be inserting the RNA in our bodies would take hold and recognize it and mount such an immune reaction. So it's really quite impressive how much protection you get, even after one dose and especially after 2 doses.
Mm-hmm. And now, did you choose to get that one, or is that just the one that you happened to get?
It is the one that I happened to get. A lot of people here of my age group had AstraZeneca, but it was all out when I was looking. So anyway, yes, I could have gotten AstraZeneca, but it was Moderna that I did get.
Mm-hmm. Now, if given the choice, is there any evidence that these are clearly more effective than the traditional style vaccines, or is it comparable?
The mRNA versus AstraZeneca?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what exactly you look at. So AstraZeneca does have a very, very, very small side effect risk of clotting. And so, given equal availability, then go for the one with the lowest risk. If you look at protection against symptomatic disease, oftentimes the mRNA virus vaccines have higher protection. But if you look at protection against hospitalization and death, then AstraZeneca is often at the top of the list. So it's a little bit hard to know. And of course, the other question is, what about with variants, and which of these vaccines is going to confer a stronger reaction? And then, you know what? It could depend on the variant. With Delta, we're seeing that the mRNA vaccines are doing really well.
Now, the mRNA vaccines are interesting because not only have they performed so well, but as you mentioned, the mRNA they contain encodes the spike protein only. Now, naively, I might think that would lead to an immune reaction that was very specific for the spike protein and perhaps not so good at recognizing other parts of the virus. And so it's sort of like a less, sort of a less robust overall immune response. Are we seeing any indication of that so far?
Not yet. When people were looking at what our antibodies were reacting against, it turned out it was like a lot of the different parts of the virus, but mainly the nucleocapsid and even more so the spike protein. So you're basically, they've designed the vaccine for exactly the target that is normally recognized by our immune system. And let's say about 50% of the time, if our antibodies are made against spike.
Are you saying in response to an mRNA vaccine, we're making
antibodies? In a natural infection, then the most antibodies are, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but let's say 50% spike, 40% nucleocapsid, everything else a little bit. And so there's this kind of correspondence between a natural reaction and the reaction to only this one little piece, the spike. The other thing about spike is it has to get the virus has to get inside our cells. So it's constrained. And evolutionary constraint is an important concept of something that can't change too much or it won't function. And so the spike can't change too much or it won't attach to the ACE2 receptors and get inside our cells. So that constraint is also a good thing because that means the virus can't some mutations are prevented from happening.
I see. So we can have some of these new variants with spike protein mutations that allow that variant to transmit better, but there really is a sort of limit to how many of those could happen.
That's right. There is a limit because they would be deleterious if they prevent it from getting inside our cells. But the other thing that's kind of interesting is there's a lot of unknowns. And so here are a few unknowns. The virus is mutating, it's accumulating changes. And so eventually our immune reactions that are primed by our RNA virus won't recognize something that's very, very, very distant. And so as the mutations accumulate, mutations that will happen. But so we'll have boosters, but the fact that we didn't use nucleocapsid in our first RNA vaccines mean it's kind of it's another tool we could use in future vaccine development, targeting a different part of the virus. And so I think we may see that turns out to have been a really strong element, a strong benefit of having a one protein vaccine. Let me tell you a little bit more about why I think that might turn out to be important is that if you get a boost, if you get a booster with a vaccine that's been targeted to a different variant, that may not actually cause you to recognize the variant very well because it's mainly going to boost your memory immune cells that are already targeting the first vaccine that you had. So it's called the hypothesis of original sin in terms of immunology. The variant that you first got exposed to is the one that you're best able to fight for the rest of your life. And we don't know if that's going to play out with SARS-CoV-2, but it does mean that boosters may not, you might not just be able to go, oh, now I'm going to get the Delta booster, and now I'm going to get the Omega booster. And your immune system may not track those changes as well because they're primed for, in my case, they were primed for the Wuhan strain, the original strain.
Interesting. What do you make of, and can you just explain for people the programmability of these new mRNA vaccines? What exactly does that mean, and how how do you look? I mean, how do you look at that in terms of our ability to adapt to new viruses in the future? Not necessarily this virus either, but what do those mRNA vaccines allow us to do
I think
now?
they're game changers because, well, I'm not in the lab actually making them, so I should be careful. But they basically allow a sequence, an RNA sequence, to be converted into a vaccine. They can design it and convert it within a matter of weeks, which is, so amazingly quick. It's harder to get. The hard part is getting it approved and getting it manufactured, but the design of it is no longer a major challenge, which is amazing.
And do you imagine that we'll be seeing more of these mRNA vaccines for other things in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, the trick that a lot of vaccine producers are aiming for are what are those evolutionarily constrained parts of a virus that are just so like, I can't change at all, or I'm not going to work. Because if you target your vaccine there, then the virus can't evolve and escape your immune reaction.